All right, good evening, everybody. I say evening because we record in the evening. This is Scott Reed with the Flock Talk the podcast, and I'm joined as always by Drew Davis. We're gonna talk a little bit about the Washington beatdown, and then we'll talk about some recruiting, but we'll go really looking forward to Saturday's game, the game against Penn State, Big Ten championship game. Playoff seeding is at stake. I don't think we have a worry about Oregon making the playoffs, but we do have to think about what the seeding will be. So we'll start. The beatdown Saturday program record 10 sacks, tying the program record. That I think is the story of the game for me. What did you take away from just a big picture from the game, Drew?
Big picture from the game, I think we're rolling. We're rolling right when we need to be, and I guess you can say. When you look at the defense, you look at guys have been in and out all year. There's been some injuries. There's been some kind of swapping around with stuff that's going on. But one steady thing you can look at it, and I think I talked about it a couple weeks ago, is just our depth. And you got guys. You're calling a whole bunch of different guys' names throughout the game, and that's really a good thing. So defensively, I'm like, this is the most comfortable Oregon defense I would say since I've graduated that I watched. That I'm just sitting here like I don't really worry about them, and that's a good thing. On the offensive side of the ball, just a big scope of things. I'm glad we're just handing the ball off and giving the ball to Jordan James. I think he had 6 or 7 touches on that first drive, and we go down and we score 7. And I'm like, why do we have to make it so difficult sometimes? I know sometimes we're trying some different stuff. But when we get that guy going, when we get those guys moved up front, the game's a lot easier for us. So just the overall scope, I just feel real comfortable going into this game. That was a great way to close out the season. That's a great way to bounce back from a Washington team that we lost to 2 years in a row where we just couldn't get it done, or lost 2 games last year. We couldn't get it done. But I'm just looking forward to the future, and I'm looking forward to this Saturday and another Oregon win.
The thing that I looked at when I was watching, uh, it's hard to say that what the coach's reasons for doing things the way they are. But I think one of the things that I noticed is they like having Jordan James fresh in the fourth quarter. So yes, they wanted to show and establish the run early, but they go to the other things because they don't want to wear him down early in the game. You can only take so many hits before your body starts to break down. And I thought late in the game, again, they were able to run the ball, just keep running and running and running. The other takeaway I had, we only saw 3 or 4 plays out of Dante Moore, but man, did he look so comfortable out there. He didn't look like he was nervous. He didn't look like he was high strung. He didn't look like he was too agitated or too amped up. He just got out there and made some plays and threw the ball really well. Strong arm, really strong arm. And I think we knew that coming out of high school, but seeing it in real action against first team Husky defenders, seeing him be able to make those throws. Only 3 passes, but they showed a lot to me, I thought. And I'm really excited about what I think he can do for the future because, that's not that far away. Dylan Gabriel's only got, a few games at best. What's he got? 4 games at best left. And so the future is always now in college football. That's the one thing about college football that's unique. There is no, oh, we'll just re-sign him and get him on another 5-year contract. Nope, he's done, and you got to move on to the next guy. So I'm excited about the future as well, especially at quarterback. I think.
Yeah, and I can definitely hear what you're saying with that. And I got to talk to Dante Moore a couple times at UCLA, and they were really happy to have him. And it's hard to step in a starting role like that as a freshman and quarterback, especially when you talk about this day and age where coaches need to win now, and they'll do whatever they need to do to put somebody in that spot. But I'm glad he got to come to a school where he can sit back and learn, from one of the best, one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the NCAA. But you look at that and you're like, all right, so he can sit back, he can ask this guy questions. He has a great offensive coordinator. They have an all around good team, let alone good offense. And things like that really help to come in and be settled when it's your time.
They do, and I think it's the whole being developed part and not being put out there in a place where, look, if you have to run the ball a lot with an offensive line that is makeshift, which I think UCLA had some problems with that last year. A makeshift offensive line, a freshman quarterback who doesn't fully know the system the way he could or should. There's a lot of flaws in that could destroy a quarterback. There have been quarterbacks in the past that after a season like that, they were never the same. And I think in this way, it's probably good that the portal exists because it got him a chance to just get a fresh start. Just say, I need to get somewhere fresh where I can clear my mind and learn from somebody for a year and understand that it is tough to be a true freshman starting at quarterback in major college football. It's not like it was even. I mean, even if you looked at Johnny Manziel, Marcus Mariota, they weren't true freshmen. They were redshirt freshmen when they were doing their first season. So it's tough, and to throw somebody into that, man, that's tough. And I felt bad for the kid last year. I feel happy that he's able to at least get that time to really build his confidence because that's the biggest thing I think for quarterbacks. Without confidence, it's tough to be good. It's tough to win games if you lack confidence, and it's tough to then get out there and be the leader if you lack confidence in yourself.
Agreed.
And that's kind of a leadership 101 thing. The other thing, obviously, Ted Johnson returned, and I think it was very clear that the offense missed him, and it was very clear just by being there that the offense felt different. He only had 3 catches, 36 yards. It wasn't like he had this big, huge game. He had the touchdown, but just him being there, it added another threat. It added another weapon, and it opens up lanes for other receivers. And I think we forget sometimes how important it is to have more than one good player so that you can spread that ball around, that you can force defenses to make a choice, and then you get to make a choice because of their choice. And I think that was really obvious for me watching how Oregon played with Tez Johnson back on the field.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I know it took a while for them to get him the ball, and I know they're kind of, and it's funny because as I watched it, I'm like, I know they're just trying to get him a couple catches so he can feel comfortable. And I also thought like they were thinking like, let's get him in the end zone. Like I think that's the perfect way to end senior night, and then to also just get our team that guy back that they've been missing, and kind of going into the Big Ten championship. So I really felt like because he was still in the third and I think beginning of the fourth quarter, and I was just like, all right, well, whatever they're doing, they better do it quick. And so, but like I said, it's he's a one of a kind player, and when you have a guy like that, you can't really replace him. And like I said, he does so much in the short game and the long game. He does a lot of things. So I know that we're happy to have him back, and looking forward to him being able to be more productive come this Saturday.
Yeah, I think the other thing I was talking to the Penn State folks about this Saturday, just my thoughts on some players they may not know. And even though it's so tough to do that because I think everybody knows everybody on this offense, but they probably don't. They probably don't watch much Oregon football. They probably don't know much about Trayshawn Holden, Tez Johnson. I think what people may not think about is Trayshawn Holden leads the team in yards per catch at 16.1. And I think he missed Tez being there as well because that's what opens him up to be in single coverage instead of double coverage. That's what opens up Evan Stewart. That's what allows some of the things that happen with Terrence Ferguson or Kenyon Sadiq is that guy that says Tez Johnson's gonna do some damage if you don't cover him, and so you have to pick somebody. And when you're good enough on offense to force defenses to pick who they're going to double cover, you're opening up a lot of options for your team. Ohio State had that with their wide receivers. You had to pick it. If you double covered Jeremiah Smith, then you're going to leave somebody else open. And I think it was evident that Oregon gave up 340 passing yards. The only time they've really had a struggle in the pass defense this year, and the Duck offense was clearly different with Ted Johnson back. The other thing that I noticed, there was a lot of good movement by the offensive line. Josh Connolly got out to some good pull plays that we haven't seen them do a lot of that yet. And that's just one more thing that the Oregon offense put on film for somebody to watch is, oh, now they can pull their guards and tackles too. Oh man, how do we defend that? And I thought, Josh talked about it after the game, and I think he talked about it on the Tuesday availability. It's just one of those things that it's good to see the offensive lineman get out and move around like that and do some different things and put some different things on film. I think in the long run, that's how you start to really build a deep playbook is making others have to defend every potential possibility and make them think. If you make them think too much and they don't play with their instincts, sometimes you can catch them off guard.
Like you said, it's a whole nother dimension. Your linebackers can't over pursue too much, or they'll get caught on that side of the ball or that side of the play. And I think I counted 4 or 5 pull plays from the first drive that I was just like, all right, this is different. And when you anytime you have, like you say, guard and tackle pulling, and then you add the tight end that's pulling from the backside as well, that's pretty nasty work.
It is, and that's again a way to make. They're going to have to do things like that against Penn State, and we can kind of move into talking about that. Penn State's going to be maybe the best defense that Oregon has faced this year. I think Abdul Carter is certainly going to be the best pass rusher the Ducks have faced. That guy, we talked about him against Ohio State and how he basically dominated Donovan Jackson in that game, and he's going to be tough to block. So the Ducks are going to have to do different things to take advantage of his aggressiveness and to find ways to get yards, find ways to get some tough running yards. You can't go out and average 2 yards a rush. You're going to still have to try to get some tough running yards, get some plays on the ground, force them to pull the safeties up so that you can then do different things with your passing game.
You
And
said, and
you know a little bit of Abdul Carter, right?
I do, I do. I was gonna say I've been able to watch him a couple times this year. That Ohio State game, he did a really good job, and Ohio State's kind of moving some guys around too. The thing I said is, you got to get the ball out quick. If you do drop back and pass, it's after a couple runs or it's after he's winded or something like that. But you don't give that guy a first down shot to be able to beat your tackle or anything like that. So just look forward to probably not a lot of one-on-ones, but adding that tight end for some extra protection and probably turning the protection towards him. So there's probably two linemen over there with eyes on him. But anytime you face a guy like that who's a potential first round pick, top 10 pick, anything like that, he can totally wreck a game, by himself. So getting a couple sacks or getting a sack and a fumble. And so that's one of the things, probably the biggest thing for us this week is to make sure that he's accounted for and that we do some things like run right at him, like make him make some tackles, make him get into the run game. Don't just let him get after the quarterback in the pass game.
Yeah, and I think the thing that also happens with a guy like that is he can force mistakes. He can force you to get off schedule by false starts, little illegal shift things that happen that because you're trying to get that extra step on him. And this is what happens against good edge rushers. A tackle will try to get that extra step. He'll try to beat that snap by a fraction of a count. False start. Now you're behind the sticks. You're first and 15 instead of first and 10. But the good news for Oregon is they do get the ball out quick. That's their offense. So they do some drop back passes where they're trying to, and they'll do some max protect. They're trying to make some shot plays down the field. Like you said, they're going to do different things. I think they're not just going to say, "Oh, we're going to always double team him with the guard and tackle," or "We're always going to do this." Or they're going to do different things to account for him, whether it be the tight end staying in with a chip, with maybe using a different form, just different protection schemes to kind of see what you can do and then throw the ball out quick, get the ball out quick, and that's what Oregon does a lot, and that will force everybody to come up, and then you maybe get that chance to take that shot real quick if you get some single coverage on the outside. I have not looked at all of their defense. They have the great defensive numbers, but they have not been perfect against the pass. I think the last 3 games they gave up 260 yards a game. They weren't perfect against the pass all year, and I think there's some options there for them. They have solid coverage, but I don't know that they have enough guys to play man coverage against the Oregon defense. So I think you're going to see a lot of zone, and that's going to open up some options for Oregon.
Yeah, and I was gonna say you talk about the last couple games, but looking at what they're doing, you nobody in college football has enough guys to run around with three or four receivers. You know what I mean? Like what
That's
Oregon
true.
has is very special, and so you look at that and you're like, all right, well they put their best guy on R1. Okay, we'll go to two, or we'll go to three, or we'll go to our tight end. And also, just shout out to Terrence Ferguson for becoming the all-time all-time leader in catches in Oregon history, passing up my guy Ed Dixon. So major shout out to him.
Yeah, and it's funny because he was having such a kind of up and down season. It took so long to get the first touchdown pass. It took so long to do some different things. Then the appendectomy took him out for a couple of games. I think it's one of those things that on senior night, again, he was able to do something special for his last game at Autzen Stadium. Well, what we hope is his last game at Autzen Stadium, right? Because there's the chance that with the loss that the Ducks drop to the 5 seed and host a playoff game. So if they play again, I don't think they'll be happy to play there. I mean, they will, but it's one of those things where you're not happy to be. You're happy to be playing at home, but you're not happy to what caused you to get there, right? I think the biggest thing with Oregon is going to be Can they get a couple of sustained drives? Can they get a couple of times where they can sustain a drive, get ahead of the sticks, do some things to kind of chew up the clock? Because you don't want to give them opportunities, and that's the other part. You don't want to give them opportunities, so you got to protect the ball. You've got to protect the ball against Penn State because you don't want to give that offense. That offense isn't the most dynamic. I know on paper the last 3 weeks they've looked dynamic, but they're not the most dynamic offense in the country. They can be defended well. What they scored 13 against Penn or Ohio State, so it's not like they're this big, huge offensive explosive type team. But I think you don't want to give them options. You don't want to give them the ball back in places that you shouldn't. You want to sustain your drives, and as I think somebody always said, you want to end every drive with a kick, right? Whether it be a field goal, a point after, or a punt, you want to end every drive with a kick that's successful. So I think that's the biggest thing is protecting the ball. If they do that well, and this is, I think, when I come down to the key to the game for me is Oregon just has too many offensive weapons. I think they have more offensive weapons than Penn State. And and they have just as good of a defense, maybe better, when you look at the fact that the leading sack person in the Big Ten is the backup to the guy who's number 4 in the Big Ten. So for sacks, so Mateo has 10.5 sacks. He is technically the backup to Jordan Birch, who has 8.5 and is 4th in the conference. So I think when you look at what the Ducks have on defense, they should be able to really kind of control the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball enough to score. Are they going to score as much as they did against other teams? I don't think so. I think it's a conference championship game. Teams tend to not get high scoring. I'm going 28-24. What are you thinking this week?
Oh, you're better than me. I still think we'll get up in the 30s. I just the way the defense is playing, the defensive line is playing 2 to 3 yards in the backfield every play. You see it game after game after game, and it just astonishes me. And so when you're playing on the other side of the line on first down on runs, it turns into a 2nd and 12, a 2nd and 14 from a 2 or 4 yard loss. I still have it 38-20. I think Penn State will kick a couple field goals. One thing our defense has been good at is once the other team does have drives and they do get going, they sometimes end in field goals, like you saw with Washington last week. Like they started out
Right.
well, put drives together, but they ended in field goals. And sometimes three's a win, when you're defense, because hey, our offense scores, they're not going to be able to keep up. So I still think the offense will roll. Only reason I say 38-20 or 38-20 because with their offense, just knowing where Tyler Warren is and knowing that he lines up at a lot of different places, knowing that he can explode for 10 or 15 catches or touches, um, I'm not really afraid of anybody else. I know they have two great running backs in Katron Allen and the other guy who I'm blanking on right now. But like I
Singleton.
said, yeah, like I said, they our defensive line plays on the other side of the ball. I don't really see them getting going much. And so I don't feel like Drew Aller can carry the whole load like that. He's still young. He's made a lot of progress from last year, but he still has a lot way to go, especially going up against a top rate defense like ours.
The one thing I would say that could change my opinion is if they get the kind of pressure on Drew Aller that they got last week against Washington, it could get ugly quick.
Mhm.
Because I don't think Drew Aller's not going to try to beat them with his feet, so he's going to make mistakes if they start getting pressure on him. He's going to throw some picks, and if there's one pick six in there or a fumble that's a scoop six, it's going to get ugly quick because that's when you start to see a team start to roll. And so that'll be interesting to watch. If they start getting pressure on Aller early and forcing him off schedule, forcing him to throw places where he wouldn't otherwise throw, that could really change the entire tone of the game. I never predict that, but I think that's one of the things that we could see happen.
Go. You can predict it right now, though.
I try not to predict that they're going to get 10 sacks because that's a pretty tough thing to predict. I do think they're going to get some pressure on Aller, and I think that's going to end up it couldn't make my score wrong. I'm going conservative because that's the way I go. I also go kind of with Vegas numbers, which that's kind of a Vegas spread, Vegas total over under. But it could be wrong because if they start getting pressure on Aller early in this game, it could really be a good thing for the Oregon offense because they're going to get the ball back in good field position, and that's going to the better your field position, the better you're going to play. It's just one of those things that happens when you start getting on the opponent side of the field for more than 50% of your plays, that's going to be a pretty good day, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk.
I got
Go
a
ahead.
quick question for you. Are you disappointed that we're not playing Ohio State again? How do you feel about that letdown by them,
Um,
if anything?
Disappointed. I think I would have liked to shut up the doubters, the people who said it was at Autzen, it was a 1 point win on a fluke play, and they had to use the timeout trick to get that time to run out. I would have liked to shut the people up that made that that were talking about that as that on a neutral field that Ohio State was going to blow out Oregon. First of all, they don't have two of their tackles, so it probably wasn't going to be the same anyway, and that would have been the excuse the second time around. So I would have liked that matchup, but at the end of the day, they lost to Michigan. They are not deserving of a spot in the conference finals. I know they beat Penn State, but they lost to Michigan at home, a team that Oregon dominated on the road. So I just think they didn't earn the spot. I would have liked to see it just to kind of silence anybody who said it was a fluke game and it only happened because of a couple of plays and it was on the road. But at the end of the day, I'm happy to see Oregon get a chance to avenge 1995. 30 years, but I still, I graduated in 94. So
Okay.
I was friends with one of the players that was on the 93 team and he went to every game in 94, but he was just so angsty about it because he wasn't there anymore and they're making this run. He and I were working together at that time because, I graduated in June of 94 to make the run just after I graduate. And it was one of those things where you didn't see it coming. And I was happened to be, in school with a lot of those guys. So I am excited to see Oregon play Penn State again. It's been a long time and it's going to be a fun game to watch. And I think when you look at it, they earned their way in. They had one loss and that got them in. I think it's tough for Indiana because they didn't get a chance to really play it against Penn State to see who deserved to be in that spot.
Yeah.
But I would have liked to see either game. I think will at least help silence anybody who questions whether Oregon could play big, tough, physical Big Ten football. And I think whether you play Penn State or Ohio State, you're going to have to prove that message one way or the other. And I think that message is going to be sent loud and clear on Saturday that Oregon can play that brand of football, which leads a little bit. We have to talk about recruiting. I know you don't do it as much as me, but man, what a class, right?
It is. I don't keep track of it as much as you do, but just following Oregon and looking at their page, they do a lot of good stuff, like I've said before, with how they market stuff. I'll just go ahead and say market now because that's what it is. But just seeing the funny thing they do with the duck and him being up in the morning and stamping all the recruits, it's definitely a great thing when you have the number one class, recruiting class, which is, Oregon has always been a great place to come, but you can actually see what's going on now with flipping guys from Ohio State and doing a whole bunch of that. Phil Knight getting involved and making some promises, doing some things. But it's great to see these great athletes coming to play football on the West Coast at Oregon in Eugene, turning it into somewhat of a powerhouse. So congrats to everybody who signed. Congrats to all those people who are signing to go to schools and continue your education and sports career. But I'm happy we got a great class.
I'm glad you brought up the Phil Knight and Naeem Offord talk because I know people outside of Oregon are making a big deal of it. They're going to make it hey, Phil Knight basically bought Offord. And the truth is, it's not much different than what USC does when a athlete has an interest in film and television. They bring in some pretty famous producers to talk to that athlete and talk to them about, hey, what's it take to be successful? Hey, I can help you if you have these ideas. We can work together. You took a kid that's a sneakerhead and you introduced him to the guy that is the best sneakerhead in the world, and they talked about being sneakerheads. That is not buying a player. That is using the resources you have to your advantage. It's no different than USC. If they brought in George Lucas, did George Lucas buy a player for USC just because? No, he's talking to the player about their shared passions, and I think that's it is what it is. Nobody's gonna. People outside of Oregon are not gonna believe that you didn't just buy all these recruits. But at the end of the day, I know for a fact that they don't run it that way. I know that it's run just like any marketing organization, and they don't just say willy nilly, give everybody all the money they want, and we'll get the best class. That's not how they do it. If they did, they would have guys like Justice Terry, the defensive tackle out of Georgia. They would have, guys like David Sanders, the Tennessee offensive lineman. They would have that kind of a class where they grabbed up all the five stars. They're not just throwing around money. They are wisely using the resources they have available. And, I know the people that run the Division Street Collective aren't out there just spending money without foresight. So I did like that story, though. I love that, that Phil Knight talked to a kid about, hey, if you want to make your own type of shoe, where else to do it better than Nike, right? And we can work together on something like that. And if he makes his own shoe, guess what? That is an NIL deal, because now what he's doing is he's making a product and he's selling it. That is what NIL is supposed to be about. So I'm excited that actually that story got out, because I think if you look at it from a realistic point of view, that's not just somebody saying, here's some money to come play for the university. That's somebody saying, we can help you brand your shoe. That is what marketing is. It's no different than Air Jordan, right? I think I'm excited about that. It's a really good example of what NIL can and could be and should be. But I'm also excited about the class because the depth. It's 3 top 10 cornerbacks, a top 5-star safety. Now you're talking the best defensive backfield class at signing. Now, nothing's ever the best until they play and put it on the field, right? Some people will say the 2008 recruiting class might have been the best ever because they were the ones that were there for 2010, 11, 12. But this will be the best group of defensive backs signed in Oregon history. And then the wide receiver group is ridiculously insane. I don't know if you've watched much of DeCorian Moore. The guy reminds me of Ryan Williams from Alabama. He's just that good where he's an impact player. I think they clocked him at 22 miles an hour as a high school senior. So he's got some speed. And he's got Odell Beckham hands, but he runs routes really well. He's not just a guy out there running a go route every time. He understands route trees. He understands different leverage techniques and things like that. So I really like him. And I'll never stop talking about Cooper Perry because I still think he's underrated by most people's standards, even though he's number 70. Most fans forget about him because they're talking about Corey Moore and they're talking about Dallas Wilson and they're excited about those guys. But Cooper Perry is somebody to watch out for. And, they've got a couple of good offensive linemen, a 5-star tackle, a high 4-star tackle with Zaire Addison and Doug Utu, and flipping a Washington kid at the last minute. I talked to Nick about that. He was excited you flipped an offensive lineman from Washington right at the last weekend. And that's it's always a great feeling when you can steal somebody, but it's also a local kid. It's a kid that wanted to be a Duck, and Oregon needed to see that senior growth. And when they saw it, we're ready to kind of pull the plug and make that offer. And he made several visits down the stretch. And I think it was pretty clear that he wanted to come to Oregon. So it's just a really great class. The other one that I talk about a lot, Dier Hill. I don't know if you saw, he put 500 and some odd yards in his state championship game on 32 touches, total yards. So he did, and he scored 7 touchdowns. I mean, he just dominated that game, and he dominated the run throughout the playoffs. And when you throw him with the bigger back, Jordan Davison, who's 5'11", 6 foot, and 220, 225, those guys are going to be a really good tandem through the years. And I think what we're seeing this year is you need some more running backs in that room that can do what Jordan James can do. You can't just have one. You need to have a couple of guys that can help share the load, because at this level, when you're going to play possibly 17 games in a season, you need guys that can share the load. It's no longer a 13th game is the championship game. It's 13th game is the conference championship game, and the 14th game is a playoff game. And you could get to 17 games in a season. And this isn't the NFL where these guys can spend as much time getting physical as they need to. They have limited amount of time that they can do these things. So depth is going to be important. And I think that's what this recruiting class is going to provide for Oregon, is depth everywhere. The offensive line, the defensive backfield, linebackers, defensive line, the edge rushers. I don't know if you saw the Toby Hastrup edge rusher. He's from Katy, Texas. This was his first year ever playing football at any level. And in his first game, he had 5 sacks. Guy is 6'3", 240 pounds, and was a track guy until somebody convinced him, and he convinced his mom to let him play football this year. a little bit of a raw prospect because he didn't know much about the game. He didn't know what a first down was when he started playing. He didn't understand the terminology. But at the end of the day, he still had 5 sacks in his first game, and he still really did great against some high level Texas players. So I think that's a guy that his growth potential could be through the roof with him. So just really good class, really deep. And I think, like you said, it's always great to be able to say that you've done something nobody else did before. And having the number one ranked recruiting class is something that matters because at most programs would love to have the kind of class that Oregon just signed. And we know that it's the Jimmies and Joes, not the X's and O's, right?
100%. And I was going to say, it's also nice when you're shaking things up. Like, usually that list consists of Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, a couple of those guys. And so you're seeing a change in the landscape with teams that are doing better recruiting because of NIL and because of resources.
Yeah, and it's actually going to be fun because it's going to create a different level of parity. That and the transfer portal is going to create a level of parity where teams that do it right can compete for championships without being a quote unquote blue blood. And you don't have to worry about whether that team has always been there because now you can find a way to get there if you use your resources right, your ability to understand and break down how good somebody is and if they're in the transfer portal or at high school and really evaluate them. The evaluation is going to be key for programs that want to win. You can't just take people because they're ranked 5 stars, but you do have to recognize what talent is. And you have to, as Dan Lanning says, you have to find the guys that are going to be the most talented out there and help your team win. And you're always looking for somebody that's more talented. And in college, you can do that. Every year you get to turn over your roster as much as you need to. Seniors graduate and players leave and things happen and you get to fill it with talent. And that's something that not everybody can do. And I like what Dan Lanning has done with this program and the way he's built it. And I like what the future looks like because it's really bright right now.
100% agree.
All right, I think that pretty much covers it for this week. I know we've got the big game this weekend, so we will chat again next week, hopefully about a win.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it, like always.
All right, Drew, appreciate you.
No problem. Take care, Scott.